Susanna and Allie. I think most of you know that this is their second tour of duty. Initially, they were at the MBF, left to attend to other matters, and then we were able to entice them to return almost a year and a half ago. So they've been here through everything, and I want you to know that apparently they did not read the reverse page of their job description when, in very clear and conspicuous language, we told them that we were going to plan a pandemic for them just to test their mettle. But they, in fact, have succeeded this past year, and we really appreciate all of the work that they've done, not only for the MBF, but frankly, for all of you who are in attendance tonight. And we welcome all of you to our fellows, our grantees, our law firm and corporate partners, our donors and legal community colleagues and friends. On behalf of the Mass Bar Foundation and my fellow trustees, I want to thank you for attending tonight's annual meeting. It's wonderful to be with you again. As Susanna said, it was a strange annual meeting last year. We engaged in that awkward elbow bumping for the first time. We were concerned and hesitant about shaking hands and giving hugs, but we learned, and we've been able to proceed through this past year. But it's still hard to fathom now that we've hit the 1-year mark on this remote existence. Exactly how to comprehend the extent to which the pandemic has changed our professional and personal lives over the past 12 months. Well, I'm sure you've attended all sorts of Zoom meetings that chronicled the doom and gloom of the past year. And I don't know about you, but I think that I'm ready, and I hope and pray that we're all ready to look forward at this point. The president is about to sign a major COVID relief bill. It seems the vaccines are on the way. Tomorrow, it's going to be 70 degrees, and the Red Sox are in spring training. So I know that these are all baby steps, and that really there remains a lot of uncertainty. But we owe much to be grateful for, and that begins with the 150 of you who have gathered tonight for this annual meeting. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge and express our gratitude to all of you, each as a treasured member of the MBF family, our fellows and donors who give generously of their time and talent, and the legal aid organizations who benefit from that support and honor it by working tirelessly to advocate for the rights of their clients. Thank you to all our board members for the extra effort you expended this past year, including Iris Tamor-Schnitzer, John Lynch, and David Henderson, and our investment advisor, Bob Lieberson, for leading the investment committee. And when in March, our endowment fell by over 10%, you stayed the course. And we saw a rebound in the value of the portfolio. And by the end of the year, it had increased in value by over 14%. So thank you. I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge our donors. They're in the program, but if you'll indulge me, just quickly run through them. To our gold partners, the Mass Bar Association, Meehan, Boyle, Black, and Bogdano, and Nutter. Our silver partners are Bove and Langa, Century Bank, the International Network of Boutique and Independent Law Firms, and Peabody and Arnold. Our bronze partners are Cosgrove, Eisenberg, and Kiley, Eden Rafferty, Ford Mediation, Freeman Matheson Gary, Justice App, Kellum and Kellum, Mintz, the investment management firm of Moody, Lynn, and Lieberson, Sprogna, Brunel, and Donison, and Todd and Weld. All of them see the value of supporting legal aid in our state, and many are here tonight. We thank them for giving back to their community in such a meaningful way. Also, let me provide a special thanks to our individual event benefactors who helped make this evening possible. They're also listed in the program. We owe much, of course, to the Mass IOLTA Committee, led by Hannah Gilson and Executive Director Jane Terrell, and to our MBF representatives serving on that committee, the past president, Janet Azikoff, and the current trustees, Angela McConaughey Skippers and Iris Tamor Schnitzer. Thank you all. The IOLTA Committee works so hard to maintain the integrity of the IOLTA program, to inspire banks to partner with the legal community as leadership banks, and to ensure that the IOLTA funds are fairly and thoughtfully distributed where they're most needed. One of our newest corporate partners, Century Bank, is one of those leadership banks, which means that they commit to keeping their rates at a level that will maximize the return of IOLTA funds. We always remind our fellow attorneys that where you bank matters. It certainly matters to our IOLTA grantees and to all the legal aid organizations here this evening. And most importantly, of course, it matters to the clients they serve. If you need additional information about leadership banks in your area, please feel free to contact Susanna. Professor Ramirez will give an overview of the new Chief Justice Ralph D. Gantz Access to Justice Fund that was established last fall in memory of Chief Justice Gantz as a way to continue his work and reaffirm his legacy. And of course, we're just delighted to be honoring U.S. District Court Judge Patty Saris as our 2021 Great Friend of Justice for her many, many contributions to the Mass legal community throughout her distinguished career. We hope to wrap up the program by 5:30 and then have the opportunity to catch up and touch base in our breakout rooms. And we hope you'll join us for some relaxed conversation and reconnect during that half hour. Of course, in the past, that's when we had our wine and aperitifs and the opportunity for networking. So we feel free to bring that spirit, whether it's actual or figurative, into your breakup sessions. Let me now provide the president's address. During the annual meeting, this serves as a kind of status of the MBF. Well, 2020 was, of course, quite a year for all of us, and the MBF was no exception. We know that this year has been long and difficult, and we've all had to dig deep to press forward. It's been a year of many souls searching, and indeed much soul searching. Certainly the highest hit clients were those served by our grantees, and they're here with us this evening. And it's these individuals and families that we need to keep in mind and in our hearts as we press on with our work. Over this past year, our grantees moved from concerns over the direct consequences of the pandemic, for example, health and safety, to the collateral consequences of job loss, evictions, deportation, partner abuse, and food insecurity. But despite the many challenges, when the world paused, collectively we persisted. We improvised, created a new paradigm for our work, and somehow, just somehow, we managed not only to do what was required, but we increased our impact. I'm delighted to report that much has been done and more is in the works. We gave the grantees the room to be creative and watched every single one rise to the challenge and continue to serve their clients in a new, innovative, and often better way. We took a long, hard look at our own internal processes and had to recognize that those systems and procedures had not kept pace with technology. And based on our findings, we made some immediate changes that we hope will streamline the grant-making process for all our grant applicants, while continuing to allow us to fulfill our fiduciary duties to steward IOLTA funds. We created a strategic planning committee to dive into the more substantive issues facing legal service providers and to make recommendations to move us into the future. As you'll hear a little bit later in the program, we've also turned our attention to consider diversity, equity, and inclusion in our leadership, in our fellows program, and in grant making. and we've created a working group to explore and improve in these areas. We engage with students at the Questrom MBA program at BU with the goal of reimagining our website and communications, as well as our organizational identity, and student consulting team was just terrific, really top notch. In fact, we were able to entice one of the coordinators to the program, Erica Parry, to join the MBF as an intern this spring to work on special projects and offer some much needed organizational support to Susanna and Allie. Welcome, Erica. This is your first meeting. We appreciate it. We recognized that our grantees had a lot of stress, and rather than using the usual approach that we did for our grantee roundtable, we decided to respond by creating a winter wellness program, offering Zoom-based weekly yoga and mediation classes to staff of all of our grantee organizations to provide some physical and spiritual sustenance to carry them, and frankly us, through the long winter of our discontent. And on top of all the organizational work that transpired in 2020, the MBF was able to carry out its most essential mission, delivery of IELTA grants program. Through a slightly modified process, we were able to engage over 100 grant reviewers as volunteers, many of whom are here tonight, and we thank you. We distributed $2.6 million in our funds to support 93 programs at 59 organizations across the state. This year, we learned how truly important the grantees are in assisting thousands of clients with the pandemic-related matters, including accessing unemployment benefits, benefits for food and economic insecurity, helping people understand their rights in housing and the eviction moratorium, gaining access to health benefits, holding school departments accountable so that remote learners, especially children with special needs, aren't forgotten in online learning, and advocating for the safety of homeless shelters, people in immigration detention centers, and prison system as they struggle to stay healthy and close quarters, and on it goes. Frankly, many legal service attorneys were on the front line in this pandemic. As you know, it hit low-income communities disproportionately. And in many cases, staff attorneys literally put their lives on the line in representing their clients. You're probably aware that immigration courts never shut down during the pandemic. And despite the concerns for their own health and safety, many of these legal service attorneys and staff represented those immigrants in the hearings before the immigration court. They and many others like them are among the heroes of this dark time, and we're extremely proud to have played even a small role in their efforts. In addition to the IELTA grants program, we funded other programs, including the MBA's high school mock trial program, the SJC's Judicial Youth Corps, and the MBF's Legal Intern Fellowship Program. Unfortunately, the mock trial program and the JYC had to be canceled this year due to COVID, but our legal internship program flourished, and we were pleased to fund $6,000 apiece to 5 extremely impressive law students for their work on nonprofit legal aid or organizations over the summer. Those 2020 legal interns are featured in the program, and they helped at Community Legal Aid, GBLS, Lawyers for Civil Rights, and the Victims' Rights Law Center. And of course, none of this could have been done without our fellows. Our fellows not only help financially, but you give us tremendous support volunteering for the grant review season, and you serve on various committees and provide governance and oversight. We know this work is fulfilling, and valuable to you because in the early stages of the pandemic, you stepped up. And in April and March of last year, we had a request from well over 100 people to serve as grant reviewers in this unprecedented season of review of grants. Your commitment to the NBF mission was never more evident that it was this year, and we are grateful to all of you. On the financial front, there's been good news and perhaps somewhat more concerning news in the offing. I'm now going to turn to our Vice President, Angela McConney-Skippers, who will give us a brief review on the financial health of the NBF. Angela?
Yes, thank you, Dick. Good evening, fellows, trustees, and friends of the MassBar Foundation. I now present the 2020 Treasurer's Report on behalf of our Treasurer, David Henderson, who is unable to join us this evening. Brevity will be the order of the day. As Dick Grahn, our president, mentioned earlier, in 2020, there was good news and there was bad news. Let's start with the bad news. As most of you know, there was a significant decline in interest rates at the onset of the pandemic, which has led to a decline in IOTA revenues as compared to the previous year. We received $2.9 million in IOTA funding in 2020, but in 2019, we received $3.4 million from IOTA. This is a difference of approximately $500,000, or 17%. However, our NBF grant-making year runs from June through May. So if we examine the figures within that time frame, we are actually behind by 23% as of February 2021. While this is not great news, we had actually braced ourselves for a 50% decline. So the silver lining in all of this is that the 2020 performance was better than expected. The downward trend was tempered by the surprisingly robust real estate activity in the Commonwealth, as well as by a few unexpected Cypre awards. So what does this mean for our grant making? In 2020, we were able to make grants totaling $2.6 million. Because this year's IOTA's receipts may fall short of that figure, it may impact our 2021 grant making. In May 2021, the trustees will meet to determine the spending target, so we'll be able to ascertain that figure then. Now, on to the good news. Number one, in recent years, we have been slowly rebuilding our stabilization fund, which was all but depleted during the recession. We can possibly look to that fund to fund our supplemental 2021 grant making. Number two, our private bar fundraising, which we use to support our grant making efforts, was also strong in 2020 through pledges from you, our fellows, our annual appeal, our law firm and corporate partners, and other fundraising initiatives. We were able to raise $260,000, a 17% increase over 2019 fundraising. We are mindful that our donors stepped forward during these uncertain and unprecedented times. We are so grateful to all of you. Number three, the NBF endowment had a very healthy investment return of about 14% in 2020. While our 2020 audit is still incomplete, we expect that the NBF's total net assets will be approximately $8.5 million. So I can report to you that the foundation's financial health remains solid. Until interest rates begin to rise again, we can expect our IOTA income to remain at relatively low levels. We are fortunate that we diversified our income and built up some reserves over the years to better weather fluctuations. We, the NBF trustees, take our stewardship of NBF funds very seriously, and you can be sure that we will remain vigilant and judicious in the coming year. I am honored to introduce our next speaker, Denise Murphy, President of the Mass Bar Association. Ali Ford will now share her screen to present President Murphy's greetings and remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. It's a pleasure to be here representing the Massachusetts Bar Association. As most of you know, I'm also here this evening as an MBF Fellow. I've been involved with the MBF since 2002, almost 20 years now. It's a community I am so proud and honored to be a part of. But it's in my official role as MBA president that I want to address you this evening. It's wonderful to have the opportunity to convey the MBA's pride in the work that the MBF community is doing to expand access to legal aid in our state. As Dick shared earlier, MBF grantees are the heroes amongst us, especially though during these challenging times. Legal aid attorneys are on the front lines, literally saving lives by ensuring basic human rights, that families have economic stability, safe housing, decent health care, a solid education, a life safe from violence or discrimination. And MBF fellows and trustees support these heroic efforts through their generous donations, considerable expertise, and many, many volunteer hours. So thank you all for the role you play. The leadership of the MBA is incredibly grateful for the important work done together by every single person on this call. But if you'll indulge me, I will take a moment to switch gears this evening to deliver a different message, one that I know is important to everyone here as well. As many of you know, my focus as president of the MBA this past year has been on lawyer well-being. And that term certainly encompasses a lot of ground. No matter what type of law we practice, we all know that the legal profession can be incredibly stressful. Finding work balance may be nearly impossible at times, never mind trying to carve out downtime to recharge our own bodies and rekindle our spirits. Oh, and yeah, try doing this all during a global pandemic. But well-being is also fostered by a sense of belonging and a sense of inclusion. And it is here where our legal community is falling far too short. In a report recently issued by the SJC's Standing Committee on Attorney Wellbeing, after town hall style meetings with 7 affinity bar organizations, we heard disturbing and painful accounts by attorneys of color and those who identify as transgender or non-binary of discrimination, racial and gender bias, microaggressions, and other forms of unequal treatment experienced by the more than 115 participating attorneys. Just as concerning is the report's confirmation that so many attorneys in Massachusetts continue to feel marginalized in their own profession, mostly due to the lack of diversity and representative leadership. Because of our collective failure to recruit lawyers from diverse backgrounds and help create pathways for success, many attorneys experience a chronic sense of isolation and may rethink their membership in the Massachusetts Bar or the legal profession altogether. To those attorneys in this audience who have felt this discrimination and have felt marginalized, we want you to know that the MBA sees this report as a call for concrete action by the bench and bar. While we recognize that some important steps have taken to diversify the Massachusetts judiciary and combat implicit bias in the court system, it is abundantly clear that we need to continue work toward more sweeping change. In the coming months, I hope you will see that these are not empty words. We will take action. As the MBA strives to advance needed reform within the legal profession, I challenge those of you here today to, first, read the full SJC report. And then, if you're in a position to do so, take a hard look at your practices, your firms, your courthouses, your professional associations, your civic and nonprofit affiliations, and consider any actions you can take to foster a more welcoming, inclusive environment for your fellow attorneys. This kind of sweeping change will take time and energy and the commitment of every single member of the Massachusetts Bar working together. But this is the moment. Now is the time. On behalf of the MBA leadership, I want to thank you for letting me use my platform here with our MBF partners and friends to highlight this critically important aspect of lawyer well-being. May you all stay safe and well.
Thank you, Denise, for sharing those important and challenging words. Clearly, as a profession, we have much to do. And it all starts by turning that spotlight inward. At the MBF, we aspire to create a philanthropic community where everybody feels welcome, where every perspective adds value, and where the path to leadership is available to everyone in equal measure. But we need to ask ourselves, are we doing all, or should we be doing more? Like many other organizations, the MBF has assembled a diversity, equity, and inclusion group to grapple with these questions. And our Vice President, Angela McConaughey-Skippers, has agreed to steer this group forward to help us as an organization identify areas where we may be falling short. We've started conversations with local affinity bar organizations and others to help inform that process. We're also looking at our grant making through the lens of racial justice and equity. We want to know whether MBF funds are having an impact on the root causes of racial injustice. Are we funding organizations that are working to address or combat the policies underlying systemic racism as defined by those who are experiencing it? The MBF and all our fellows have an opportunity to meet this moment and establish policies and practices that will ensure we are a more representative organization now and in the future. And we welcome all of you to join us in this effort. And speaking of the critical role of our fellows, I'd like now to turn the program over to Perry Wu, the current secretary of the MBF, who will celebrate our new Life Fellows. Perry, Angela.
Dick, and hello, everybody. As Dick mentioned, my name is Perry Wu, and I'm the secretary of the MBF Board of Trustees. I've also been a proud MBF fellow since 2001. It's hard to believe it's been 20 years, but I'm guessing that many here this evening can say the same, if not longer. I suppose that's a testament to the MBF being an organization truly worthy of the investment of our attention and resources. As Dick noted earlier, our MBF fellows really are the heart and soul of the foundation. We are grateful to all of our fellows who give their time and talent as grant review volunteers, committee members, advisors, and trustees, and who also give their treasure as donors through their financial pledges to support the MBF's mission of expanding access to justice. This evening, we're delighted to honor 17 fellows who completed their pledges in 2020, marking a milestone in becoming Life Fellows of the Foundation. As with most things in the past 12 months, the way we'll be honoring our new Life Fellows is a little different this year. Typically, we would invite them to step forward as we call out their names to accept a token of our appreciation and be recognized by their peers. This year, all of our new Life Fellows will instead be receiving that token of appreciation in the mail. And they'll also be featured in the slideshow you're about to see. I'll read the names of our new Life Fellows so that they can at least be celebrated in this virtual way. But before I begin, I should note that in accordance with the Massachusetts Code of Judicial Conduct, this list does not include any judges who have become lead Life Fellows, the higher giving categories. But you know who you are. President Circle, Gold Life Fellow, Janet Asserkoff. Oliver Wendell Holmes, Life Fellow. Robert Birchie. Our new Louis D. Brandeis Life Fellows. Frank Ciano, Charles Damari, Harry Margolis, James Martin, and our new Foundation Life Fellows, Jacqueline Bowman, Corey Carvalho, Lloyd Godson, the Honorable Marguerite Grant, Robert Kerwin, Thomas Kiley, Rebecca Ponticus, Walter Sullivan, Melvin Warshaw, and Barry Weissman. On behalf of the Board of Trustees, congratulations to all of you. We wish we could recognize you all in person, but please know that we are extremely grateful for your tenacity, dedication, and commitment. We extend our heartfelt thanks for the important role you play in our MBF community. And now I'll turn it back over to Dick.
Somehow I feel that we need to applaud all of our life members. Thank you. We hope you'll remain involved and explore other ways to increase your involvement in the MBF. I would like now to turn our attention to somebody whose name is synonymous with access to justice in our state, and who spent every day trying to understand the shortcomings of our legal system so that barriers could be removed and improvements could be made to ensure equal access for all citizens. And that person, of course, is the late Chief Justice Ralph Gants. Much has been said about the chief in the months since his passing, and although I share all of those views, I won't reiterate the wonderful sentiments, but I do want to note his connection to the MBF and with many of us here this evening. He was a colleague to many of us in the early days of our career, a friend, a mentor, a visionary, and a fearless leader in the courts. And in 2017, he was our Great Friend of Justice awardee. As you'll hear from Professor Ramirez, he was working on many important systemic issues before he died. Simply saying that he left us too soon somehow doesn't begin to do justice to his service. When the MBF was approached to participate as a fiscal agent for the Ralph D. Gants Access to Justice Fund last fall, we jumped at the chance to help keep his work moving forward. Professor Ramirez walked alongside her husband to improve the access to justice for all. And she's prepared remarks to share with us tonight regarding the fund. And Allie, if you would you cue that up for us now?
Thank you, Dick, for that kind introduction and warm reflection on Ralph's leadership and his personal connection to so many of you here today. And thank you to all of you, to the Mass Bar Foundation Fellows, grantees, donors, friends here this evening, for allowing me to take a few minutes to talk about something that's very dear to my heart. And that is the Ralph D. Gants Access to Justice Fund. As we all know, and as Dick mentioned, when he died, Ralph's work was not done. So we decided to honor him by honoring his work and by continuing to do the work that he cared about. His work focused on empowering the disempowered, ensuring the rights of marginalized populations, and protecting the vulnerable. But there were three specific areas that were of importance to him. The first area was access to justice. He had spent years trying to address the structural barriers that litigants, especially the pro se litigants, faced every day. He encouraged all of us to sign up for Lawyer for the Day programs so that the 80% of litigants entering family court and entering housing court without lawyers by their sides could have legal assistance. He advocated for a civil Gideon law that would fund lawyers to those facing eviction. And on the day that he died, he was working with a 95-person task force that he had helped to convene to stave off evictions in housing court. He was trying to provide those facing eviction with legal mediators, with lawyers, with housing specialists, and with raft funds that would enable the tenants to negotiate a settlement with their landlords and keep tenants in their homes. The second focus of his work was, of course, racial justice. He knew that Black people in Massachusetts were being imprisoned at a rate 8 times that of their white cohorts, and Latinx people at 5 times the rate of white people. In terms of national disparities, we ranked first in the country in terms of Latinx disparities and 13th in terms of Black disparities. He wanted to learn, what are the factors driving these disparities? And he was committed to addressing those factors. To that end, he commissioned the Harvard Law School to do a report on those disparities. And on the day that he died, he sat in this room and worked on the court's response to that study. Finally, his third focus was on criminal justice reform. He had worked with the Mass Bar Association and other groups to get criminal reform legislation passed. He testified before the legislature about the racial disparities being created by mandatory minimum sentences. And he was also very focused on reentry programs. He knew that 2/3 of those entering the criminal justice system returned to it too quickly. So he worked with probation and the legislature to provide reentry services at every local office for community corrections for every person leaving prison or jail. Knowing how passionate he was about these issues, Rachel, Michael, and I thought the best way to honor him would be to continue his legacy. He ran out of time. But we decided to use our time to move forward with his work in these 3 areas. So, together with some of his treasured colleagues and friends, we created the Chief Justice Ralph D. Gantz Access to Justice Fund, with the goal of raising funds in his memory and stewarding those resources to support the courts and nonprofit organizations that are working to advance the causes he cared so deeply about. The 3 priority areas of the fund are aligned with his work. The things he focused on tirelessly before he passed: access to justice, racial equity, and criminal justice reform. We realized funds for structural changes in these areas were scarce, and that small amounts of money could be used to help the courts and legal services organizations by creating a cadre of Ralph Gantz Access to Justice and Judicial Intern Fellows. By prioritizing law students of color, first-gen students, and law students with disabilities, we will be trying to create a pipeline of social justice advocates and judicial interns. We hope these fellows and interns will one day aspire to be judges so that our judiciary will begin to reflect the rich diversity of the state. We also hope to provide money to train our judges about restorative justice practices and to provide the Office of Community Corrections with re-entry funds that will help those coming out of prison and jail navigate the re-entry process. We are so grateful to the Massachusetts Bar Association for giving the fund its virtual home, and to the Mass Bar Foundation for serving as our fiscal agent. We are so honored to have Denise Murphy and Dick Gahn both serving on the fund's advisory committee. We started this effort back in October, and these initial few months have been focused on fundraising from law firms and from individuals. I am thrilled to report that we have raised over $340,000 so far. The committee will be continuing in its fundraising efforts, but we are also now turning our attention to grant making and hope to make our first grants by the end of this year. We are very humbled by the response so far. The legal community has clearly stepped up to honor Ralph, and in this incredibly meaningful way. Our family and the committee is so grateful. I'm sure quite a few of you here this evening have donated to the fund, and I offer my heartfelt thanks to you as well. And thanks to Dick, Susanna, and Allie for their behind the scenes support in getting this fund off the ground. I invite everyone here tonight to join our efforts. Working together, we can continue Ralph's legacy and ensure that we create an increasingly fair and accessible legal system for all. I want to leave you with a quote from the Talmud. Do not be daunted by the enormity of the work before us. Do justly now. Walk humbly now. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are any of us free to abandon it. Thank you. And with that, I will turn the program over to Dick and offer all of you my heartfelt wishes for a successful year ahead for the Mass Bar Foundation.
Well, thank you, Debbie, for those moving and inspiring remarks about your husband and the Gantz Fund. We at the MBF are honored to play even a little role in continuing the legacy of such a giant in our legal community. He truly was a remarkable lawyer, judge, and as his son Michael said, just a good mensch. We look forward to working with his family and friends and colleagues to ensure that his legacy continues. We now turn our attention to the governance of the organization. and our election of new trustees and officers. But first, as we do each year, I'd like to acknowledge a few trustees in particular. First, I want to thank David Henderson for his service as an officer these past few years. David couldn't be with us tonight, but I wanted to acknowledge the many ways in which he's gone above and beyond in his role as secretary and treasurer. He played an integral role in recruitment efforts, in mentoring young fellows and helping them create pathways to leadership in the MBF. He was key in establishing our strong partnership with Nutter, who has not only been a law firm partner, but a generous donor of space for our past events. He is a wonderful, insightful colleague, and now he's retiring from the practice, but we hope that we'll be able to continue our relationship with him as he remains a trustee. There are also two esteemed colleagues who will cycle off the board now due to term limits, Dennis Lindgren and Harvey Weiner. Dennis became a fellow in 2010 and joined the board in 2013. He's been a committed and engaged trustee ever since, served as an enthusiastic grant reviewer and advisory committee chair and facilitator. He stepped up as a lead fellow, becoming a Brandeis Fellow in 2014 and a Holmes Fellow in 2018. He was instrumental in the success of the 50th Gala, serving on that committee, and without his effort, it would not have been the success it was. We owe much to him and his energy, commitment, and steadfast support. So on behalf of the board and all of your friends, Dennis, we thank you very much. Harvey Weiner became a fellow in 2005 and joined the board in 2010. He has also been an enthusiastic and engaged trustee ever since, serving as Grant Advisory Committee Chair and also on the 50th Gala Committee. He joined the Executive Committee and ultimately served 2 terms as president. He provided solid leadership during the most difficult of times, when the economy and IOLTA were reeling. And then again, when the MBF experienced a complete staff turnover last year. In this past year, he continued to provide excellent counsel to me as president and helped us guide the organization through a global pandemic. He became a Brandeis Fellow in 2011, a Holmes Fellow in 2013, and joined the President's Circle in 2019. And everything he's done was done with a keen eye focused on the advancing the mission of access to justice, but also with a sense of humor that made MBF board participation very congenial. Harvey, your diligent work on behalf of the MBF has led us to a higher ground, and for that, we are thankful. And on a personal note, I want to thank you for your friendship of some 30 years and publicly acknowledge with affection and gratitude how important you've been to me and to the MBF. We know our work will continue in new and creative ways. And now on to the election. This year's nominating committee was chaired by Fran Ford and included Judge Bonnie McLeod and Kevin Keneally. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Fran to present the nominating committee's report.
Thank you, Dick, very much. Being duly appointed and formed, the MBF Nominating Committee recommends that the following slate of candidates for 2021 officers and trustees be adopted. 2021 officers with terms ending in 2022. President, Richard J. Grahn. Vice President, Angela C. McCarney Skippers. Treasurer, G. Perry Wu. Secretary, Melissa Langer. 2021 trustees with terms ending in 2025. The Honorable Megan H. Christopher. Attorney Tara D. Dunn. The Honorable Marguerite T. Grant, Attorney Melissa Langer, and Attorney Mary Jean Stone. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank, and the nominating committee. So in this virtual election, once the motion is moved, I'm going to ask our MBF fellows on the call to use the thumbs up icon as a reaction. And if there were any abstentions, please note them in the chat. Is there a motion to elect the slate of officers and trustees as recommended by the 2021 nominating committee?
So moved.
Is there a
And I
second?
second that. I second that.
All right, as we've done in the past, we're going to ask you to vote by thumbs up. All in favor? All right. Are there any opposed? As I said, if there are any abstentions, please note them in the chat. And it looks like it passes. Congratulations to our new trustees and officers. To Judge Christopher, Judge Grant, Melissa Langa, thank you for your continued service into your second terms. And thank you, Perry, for agreeing to take on the role of treasurer. And Melissa Langa is stepping up to the executive committee to serve as secretary. To our new trustees, Tara Dunn and Mary Jean Stone, welcome aboard. I think you'll find much satisfaction and fulfillment in your service to the MBF. And now, moving on to the main event we've all been waiting for. The MBF Great Friend of Justice Award is given each year to an individual who's demonstrated extraordinary passion for justice, consistent with the MBF's values and mission of increasing access to justice throughout Massachusetts. The MBF trustees have had Judge Patty Saris on our radar for some time. Judge Saris joins an illustrious list of past awardees, including Judge William Young, Chief Justice Margie Marshall, Chief Justice Ralph Gantz, and last year's awardee, Attorney General Maura Healey. Many of us have appeared before Judge Saris, and we know how thoughtful, attentive, deliberate, and courteous she is to everyone in her courtroom. Those traits were developed over her stellar legal career, one marked by ceaseless efforts to advance the rule of law. Following her graduation from Radcliffe and Harvard Law School, she served as a staff member on the Senate Judiciary Committee, an assistant U.S. attorney, magistrate judge, superior court judge, federal judge, including her service as chief judge, an important member of the U.S. Sentencing Committee, and as a liaison to the Nelson Fellows and Lindsay Fellows who intern in the federal court. Her career is an example of dedication and deep commitment to assuring justice. But that commitment is not of recent origin. Indeed, she was so committed to the assuring that justice be done that during her first appearance before the First Circuit as a young assistant U.S. attorney, she actually went into labor. Now, if that's not dedication, I don't know what is. And for all these reasons, and for so many more that I can't enumerate, please join me as we proudly honor Judge Patty Saris with the MBF's 2021 Great Friend of Justice Award. Judge Saris.
Judge Saris, you're muted.
There we go. So I'll start again. I just want to say that it was a great introduction, and thank you so much for this award. I couldn't believe you started with the going into labor in the First Circuit story. My husband's here and he can attest that's exactly what happened. So, you know, I've been a judge for, believe it or not, more than 35 years. And I am so touched to receive this Great Friend of Justice Award. It's so meaningful at this stage in my career. I want to thank Dick Gran, the board president, for that wonderful introduction. Susanna Thomas is the executive director who saw me through this. all the folks on the Board of Trustees. And in particular, I wanted to thank Melissa Langa, who is also in my book group. You see, when she called me, I thought she was just going to give me a recommendation on a good book, maybe a good play or something. But I heard about this award and then met with wonderful people like Angela McConney Skippers and the event manager and other members of the board. And I just learned what an important and significant job that this group does. I also want to mention that I'm good friends with Ralph Gantz and with Debbie, who you just heard from, Professor Ramirez. And to get the same honor that he got is particularly touching. There are very few people who have done so much for justice as Justice Gantz. And I also must say, in the field of criminal justice, he was a leader. As many of you know, I'm going to talk about criminal justice. As many of you know, I was nominated by President Obama and confirmed to be the chair of the United States Sentencing Commission just before the congressional recess, just before they went out on Christmas in 2010. What a daunting time to be asked to be chair. We were at the peak of mass incarceration, both at the state and the federal courts. I had worked for Senator Kennedy on the Senate Judiciary Committee, as you heard, on the Sentencing Reform Act of 1984, and had been sentencing under the guidelines since I became a federal judge in 1994. I never liked mandatory minimum sentencing and still don't. And I came to learn that drug sentences needed to be lowered. But how are we going to do that? Congress, when I entered, was divided on criminal justice reform. And my first year was rocky. I got questions in congressional oversight hearings like, why are you judges in Massachusetts so liberal? Why don't you agree with mandatory sentencing? Everything from the commission budget to the very need for a commission was challenged. I even got criticized by one person by being, well, not just me, all the commissioners, as being big fat lemurs who do nothing. So when I started, the federal prison population was 217,000 inmates and still climbing. Defendants with drug charges constituted over half of the Bureau of Prisons population, with Black men receiving harsher sentences than white men. The concern, it was not just budgetary. The Bureau of Prisons at one point accounted for more than 1/4 of the Department of Justice budget, but it was so much more than that. There was also very serious, dramatic humanitarian impacts from these long sentences on prisoners, on their families, and on all of our communities. At the same time, rates of violent crime, which had originally spurred these tough sentences in the 80s and 90s, were decreasing. And in states like Texas, South Carolina, Maryland, and California, took places you might not otherwise expect. They were taking leadership roles in reducing sentences. And you know what? There was no increase in crime. The Sentencing Commission is a bipartisan commission within the judicial branch. Its mandate is to reduce sentencing disparities and to increase proportionality in sentencing. And we on the commission had over 50 statisticians and policymakers and lots of data upon which to make policies and propose amendments and suggest reform. We went to work. We found that earlier reform efforts to reduce the crack penalty disparity, which some of you may know about, resulted in no increase in recidivism. That's a really important data point. It didn't impact public safety at all. And we relied on that key finding to pass guideline amendments that reduced all sentencing guidelines, drug sentencing guidelines by 2 levels. And we made the changes retroactive. We did this in a bipartisan way with no opposition by Congress. Although Congress does have the right to veto our measures, no legislation was passed, and in a bipartisan way, we got votes. Oh, excuse me, we didn't get any opposition. So more than 40,000 defendants became eligible for reductions on average of about 25 months. And on the very first day the changes went into effect, 6,000 people walked out the door. And so that we looked at that and studied it, because I said we had all these statisticians, And that there was no increase in recidivism. You heard about some of those recidivism statistics. It was a success. But there was only so much we could do with statutory change. We looked at the sentencing practices of prosecutors and judges. We studied mandatory minimums, and we made recommendations to Congress to reform the most draconian of the statutes. For example, ones that double the mandatory minimums for certain drug offenses and stack sentences and gun crimes that could lead to a life sentence for someone who'd never been in trouble before. As a result of these proposals and so much work by stakeholders like the very people that you fund, the Congress was poised to act. One of my biggest disappointments is I wasn't there when they passed this bill. I ran out of time, but the bill passed the next term and with much bipartisan support again. And that was the genesis of the First Step Act. And the reason it's called that is because it's only the first step, and there's so much more that needs to be done. And I'm so glad that the Ralph Gantz Foundation will be addressing these issues. Another important reform, and it was really an unexpected reform. We did a lot with compassionate release for sick prisoners because the Bureau of Prisons hardly ever let people out. And who could have anticipated the COVID crisis? Who could have possibly anticipated that when we did these hearings and then it was put into the legislation that judges could grant compassionate release motions, this became an extremely important measure in the COVID crisis to release people who were at the highest risk of COVID, but did not pose big risks to the safety of the community. So there's so much more to talk about, so much more that legislation that needs to be done. And I'm hoping that your group and all your grantees get involved in it. But as the former chief judge in Boston, I want to boast a little bit about what we've been doing here in Massachusetts. I'm pleased that some of my colleagues are here on the line, as well as many of my friends. We have tried to improve criminal justice here at home. We've put in drug courts and restorative justice programs and reentry initiatives. We've helped prisoners get jobs while on release in the city. Leaders in this area were Judges Sorokin and Kelly and Cabell and our fabulous probation officers. We also mentor students from Boston in the courthouse in a program called the Lindsay and Nelson Fellows. I think Judge Dean's on the phone, on the line, and she's been the one who's been spearheading that. And we've had a Discovery Justice program to teach students about the importance of the rule of law and the importance of the independence of the judiciary, especially after the last few years. We want our students to understand that. The MBF has been activist in its funding of organizations. I've noticed how many groups that some of them I've given to actually myself before I knew they were also grantees here. I've noticed how many groups that the MBF funds to provide better representation to the poor and to immigrants and to victims of domestic violence and other worthy causes involving children. I am so proud to learn about this group so deeply, and that you chose to honor me. So thank you again. I look forward to meeting you all. And Dick, I'm so sad that we don't have a real cocktail party. I'd love to clink glasses and wine with all of you. But Dick promised to invite me back when we're back, bumping elbows and hugging. And I hope someday to meet a lot of you in person. So thank you so much again for this award.
Oh, thank you, Judge Harris. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for all you've done to champion justice in our state, in our nation. You've had a remarkable career, and we, as citizens of the Commonwealth, owe you a great debt of gratitude. We're proud to recognize you this evening. And typically at this point, I would pass along the physical award, but because we can't do that, we'll make arrangements to have it delivered. And as I promised before, next year, we're going to invite you and we'll have a makeup session. That wraps up our formal program, but we hope you'll stick around to spend a little time in our breakout rooms and catch up with old friends and meet some new friends and rekindle the bit of community that we've lost this past year. In a moment, Ally is going to break us up randomly into smaller groups so that we can chat informally and say hello and check in with one another. And we hope you'll join us. I think we have enough time for maybe 2 sessions of 10 to 15 minutes each. And we're going to give everyone a minute to leave the meeting if you need to. So otherwise, feel free to grab a glass of wine or a cup of tea or liquid of your choice. And we'll come back together for just a few moments afterwards to wrap things up. So Ally, lead on. We're back.
We are back.
Great. Well, I hope you enjoyed the conversations. We recognize that this is an odd world in which we live now. But you've been good sports. And to wrap this up, I want to say just a few words. One, Susanna and Ally, thank you so much for everything that you did. All of the logistics.
All year long.
Queuing this and queuing that and getting the words to match the mouth movement. We appreciate that. To our fellows and donors and law firms, corporate partners, thank you again for your support of legal aid programs. And for those of you who would like to learn more about supporting the MBF by becoming a fellow or becoming a lead fellow, or if your firm has a need to part with money, we're certainly willing to provide all of the information that's necessary to allow you to do that. To our grantees, once again, thank you. You're doing the Lord's work, and we really appreciate what you've had to encounter this past year. And you've done it with grace, and we truly appreciate it. So with that, thank you for attending this 2021 annual meeting. And next year, we're going to do this in person. Take care. Thank you.
Bye, Valerie.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.